We're going to start off this passage with a little bit of information about what an analyst is. Starting off, the mental features discoursed of as the analytical are in themselves but little susceptible of analysis. Don't get too confused, okay? I know this first few sections are really confusing, so I'm going to help you out breaking them down, all right? We are talking about a mental feature. Things that your brain does, or do, yes. I don't know, that's kind of a strange one there. It's a mental feature. Analysis is a mental feature. We appreciate them only in their effects. You only care about your brain if your brain can work. If your brain doesn't work, like some of y'all, then you get really kind of angry at it. It happens sometimes. We know of them, among other things, that they are always to their possessor, when inordinately possessed, a source of the liveliest enjoyment. Those of you who know you have smarts, you enjoy being smart. As the strong man exults in his physical ability, delighting in such exercises as call his muscles into action, so glories the analyst in that moral activity which distangles. So, if you're strong, Mr. Reynolds, then you enjoy using your muscles. If you're smart, you enjoy using your brain. I didn't get any laughs about Mr. Reynolds being strong, so thank you for appreciating me. I get it, all right? So right here, we have an analogy, is what we're seeing here. The strong man exalts in his physical ability. We talked about those yesterday. So a strong man gets enjoyment out of being strong, of using his muscles. A smart man or a smart person enjoys using their brain. He, the analyst, someone who analyzes. He gets pleasure from even the most trivial occupations, bringing his talents into play. He, the analyst, is fond of enigmas or mysteries. Of conundrums, problems. Of hieroglyphs, exhibiting in his solutions of each a degree of acumen which appears to the ordinary apprehension preternatural. Crazy language here, okay? So, to solve all this, essentially, smart people enjoy using their brains. That's it, all right? An intelligent person, someone who uses their brain, enjoys using their brain. They like solving mysteries. They like reading difficult things like hieroglyphics. They like problems so that they can fix them. That's what someone who has intelligence likes to do. They like to use their intelligence, just like someone who is strong likes to use their strength. That's all he's saying here. But we need to find a connection here. We need to keep going in some way. What's a game that a lot of smart, quotation marks there, people play? Chess. Right, you can even see it if you go down just a few lines here. He's going to use chess as his way of talking about analysis, about someone who uses their brain. Down here. Yet to calculate is not in itself to analyze. You can be really good at math, but you won't be really good at using your brain still. For instance, a chess player, for example, does the one without effort at the other. I can be really good at chess. Does that make me smart? No, not necessarily. It means I can calculate. Oh, look, they move there, so I should move here. It doesn't take a whole lot of brains to do that. It's just reactionary. It is not proactive, though, to do. You can say that you're smart, but you're not good at analyzing what you're doing. It follows that the game of chess and its effects upon mental character is greatly misunderstood. He's saying, I know people think that chess players are smart, but that's not really always the case. And it really isn't. Just because you're good at chess does not mean you are very intelligent. Not all the time. So, while chess is an important thing, while we can use it off of someone who has good at calculations, what we can say is chess does not fit all the details. Under the analysis umbrella. While chess does showcase someone's intelligence in some ways, it does not fit our entire idea of what an analyst does. An analyst is someone who can analyze something, who can use analysis to understand what's going on around the world, about this one opportunity, this one thing going on next to you. It does not just mean being smart or being able to play chess. Being able to analyze is something different, something added to that. As I said, this first little section is a little bit confusing. Don't worry, we'll get through it together. He goes on talking about chess for a couple of lines here, and we're not going to go through every single line of what he's talking about because he is kind of redundant. I mean, as in he repeats himself in some ways. What he's writing here is really thick, all right? And while I love thick writing, it is not the best of what we need. So let's go to the next page. Side of the page over. He's still talking about chess and how chess doesn't really fit everything we need to understand about someone who can analyze, and an analysis is who they're called. So if we go down here, we get what he's talking about. You're not the only manifold form. Here you go. These are not the only manifold, but multiform. Right here. What he is saying, I'm just going to give it to you, what he's saying. To be good at chess. Okay, I'm going to raise it up here, y'all, so that people in the back can see. To be good at chess, you merely need to have good memory and play by the book. He uses a bunch of language to end up saying this. In order to be good at chess, all you need are two things. Have a strong memory and play by the book. Know exactly if he does this, if my opponent does this, then I should do this. That's playing by the book. So he should be able to memorize that and play by the book. That's it. That's all it takes to be good at chess. But to be an actual analyst, to be someone who analyzes the situation, who breaks it down and tries to understand all the parts of what's happening, for that you need to be a little bit different. You need to have something a little extra there that is not really fitting underneath the good player of chess. And chess is supposed to be a smart person's game. What you need is found on the next page. As I said, we're just going to go over this briefly. All right? This is a little... this beginning of the story, it can be very confusing. What you need is found on the next page here. The necessary knowledge is that of what to observe. Our player, the analyst, someone who can really understand the situation, break it down for what it needs to be, confines himself not at all, nor, because the game is the object, does he reject deductions from things external to the game. An analyst thinks outside the box, is what they're saying here. Have any of y'all ever played poker? Hopefully not for money. Okay, because that's illegal. All right? One person. All right. Well, in poker, who do you play against? Do you play against the cards? Do you play against the people on the table? Do you play against the house or the person dealing? Who do you play against? Sorry? It's not just about what cards you get, no. You're not just playing the cards. You're not just playing against the house or the person dealing the cards. Who you're playing against the people playing with you. You're going against them. You're looking at them and saying, are they lying right now or are they telling the truth? You don't just stick yourself in the box of, oh, I only have these cards. You also have all the information around you. How are these people reacting around me? Are they cheating? Are they lying? Are they telling the truth? Are they folding for a reason? What are they doing here? Can I bluff my way out of this? You're not just studying the board, the game. You're also studying the people playing the game. That's what he's going to be breaking down here in these next couple of lines. He's talking about how does an analyst, a true analyst, one who thinks outside the box, break down a game. He breaks down a game by examining the countenance of his partner. He's comparing it carefully with that of each of his opponents. So I'm going to put that over here. An analyst thinks outside the box. An analyst, how he thinks outside the box. If we know that an analyst thinks outside the box, this is how he thinks outside the box. He doesn't just look at the game itself. He looks at the people around him, as it says right here. He examines the countenance of his partner. He compares it carefully with that of each of his opponents. He considers the mode of assorting the cards in each hand. How does he put the cards? Often counting trump by trump and honor by honor. Though he glances bestowed by their holders upon each. He notes every variation of face as the play progresses, gathering a fund of thought from the differences in the expression of certainty, of surprise, of triumph, of chagrin. For the manner of gathering up a trick, he judges whether the person taking it can make it in the suit. He recognizes what is played through feint by the air with which is thrown upon the table. So he is studying a lot more than just the cards, just the game. He's also studying the people. What are they doing? How are they reacting to this situation? Are they happy? Are they sad? Are they kind of ticked off at what they have? Are they just throwing their cards away in disgust? How are they setting their cards? He is studying everything outside the game to get information on how to win, essentially. He does more than just the game. He does way more. He thinks outside the box when it comes to playing games, like chess or with cards or anything like that. So these are the different ways he thinks outside the box right here. If we go to the very bottom of this page, the very next paragraph, we have kind of an interesting kind of roundabout way of summarizing everything here. He says, the analytical power should not be confounded with simple ingenuity. Fancy words here, okay? Being able to analyze does not make you smart. That's what he's saying here. The analytical power should not be confounded with simple ingenuity. For while the analyst is necessarily ingenious, the ingenious man also remarkably incapable of analysis. What does he mean there? What he means, and I'm going to bring it up here so the people in the back can see. I'm going to erase some stuff. What he is saying there in these last few lines is analytical power, being able to think outside the box, is not just being smart. While the analyst is smart, is always smart, not every smart man can analyze. Now that's a lot to write there, but he is summing up his entire point. Analytical power, being able to think outside the box, studying people, studying people's reactions, understanding what they're going to do. While analytical power is not just being smart. You can't just be smart and have that power, all right? The analyst, someone who can do that, will always be considered smart. But not every smart man can analyze. I would think I'm a pretty intelligent guy. I cannot analyze. I'm not a detective. A detective, I would consider usually is almost always smart. And he can probably always analyze much better than I can. So it's something added onto intelligence. It's not just being smart. There's something extra to it that people have, that people need. All this to say, all this stuff about analyzing, being smart, intelligence, chess, all that weird stuff, all of it can be found on the very end. Why he is even saying this stuff. He says it right here. The narrative which follows will appear to be, to the reader, somewhat in the light of a commentary upon the propositions just advanced. Right here we get the reason why we have the story. All these thoughts that he just thought of, that he wrote down, he shared with us, bless you. He says, this narrative, the story, which follows, will appear to the reader somewhat in the light of a commentary upon the propositions just advanced. So this is the kind of, you know what, I've said all this stuff, let me back it up with a story, with an anecdote, essentially, is what he's saying. A short story to back up what he's thought of, what he said. That's the reason why we get to the story. Some versions of the story will knock off this entire first section, but I think that it's rather important. Edgar Allan Poe wrote that section for a purpose. And it's to kind of showcase, for one, his own intelligence, and to set up who this analyst is. Who is someone who can analyze a situation and understand things and break them down. Not very many people can do that. This is the very basis of what Sherlock Holmes' character is. But this was written 50 years before Sherlock Holmes was even thought of, was even created by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Edgar Allan Poe was the first one to create the idea of the analyzing detective. So, when we dive into the story itself, right here. So, from here on out, what I want you to do is you can put right here in a box the actual story. This is where the story actually begins. That first little bit is just a little pre-intro, a little, pre-work here. Hey, if you need some tissue, there's some tissue. All right. So now we have the actual story itself from here on out. As I said, the characters have French names. It's set in France. I'm really bad with French words, so I'm going to butcher the language. I'm sorry. If you know French, if you're online and you know French or anything like that, I don't care. Okay, French people, their language is horrible to me. But that's my own personal thoughts, and we'll just go with it. Residing in Paris during the spring and part of the summer of 18, I there became acquainted with a Monsieur C. Auguste Dupin. This young gentleman was of an excellent, indeed, of an illustrious family, but by a variety of untoward events had been reduced to such poverty that the energy of his character succumbed beneath it, and he ceased to bestir himself in the world, or to care for the retrieval of his fortunes. So we got a little information about this character, Monsieur C. Auguste Dupin. He's going to be our main character. This is our detective, our main character, Auguste Dupin. Notice here already that while we're introduced to the main character, do we know who our narrator is? Who is speaking this? No. Our narrator is a mystery. We have no idea who our narrator is. We know how our main character, our detective, but that's it. We know that he comes from an illustrious family. So that means his family's rich, essentially. Sorry. His family's rich. We know that. But he lost all of his money. By some untoward events, He had been reduced to such poverty that the energy of his character succumbed beneath it. He was so poor that he stopped being happy, even. He stopped caring anymore. He stopped caring for the retrieval of his fortunes. By courtesy of his creditors, there still remained in his possession a small remnant of his patrimony. So, the people who took his money, they left him a little something. And upon the income arising from this, he managed, by means of a rigorous economy, to procure the necessaries of life, without troubling himself about its superfluities. Books, indeed, were his sole luxuries. So his creditors, the people who took his money because he owed so much, left him one little thing. Right? And that little thing made him money. That little thing. It kept him, as it says right here, because he worked so hard, it kept him in the necessaries of life. Food, water, shelter, hopefully toilet paper. We found that out with the pandemic. That's pretty important to a lot of people. So it kept him above things. It kept him with the necessities of life, the necessaries of life here. Books, indeed, were his sole luxury, man after my own heart. And in Paris, these are easily obtained. Our first meeting was at an obscure library in the Rue Morgue, where the accident of our both being in search of the same very rare and very remarkable volume, our book, volume here is a book, brought us into closer communion. We saw each other again and again. I was deeply interested in the little family history which he detailed to me with all that candor which a Frenchman indulges whenever mere self is the theme. That's kind of a saying right there. French people, like to talk about one topic. You know what that topic is? Themselves. All right, I can talk about myself. I'll talk to you all day. I was astonished, too, at the vast extent of his reading. And above all, I felt my soul enkindled within me by the wild fervor and the vivid freshness of his imagination. So, we're still getting a lot of information about this Auguste Dupin. We know that he was wealthy. We know that he works hard for whatever little bit that he has since he lost his fortune. And we see that he is, as it says right here, in the vivid freshness of his imagination. So this guy he might sound a little bit young. He used to be wealthy, as we said. He's lost his wealth now. He works hard for the little bit that he has. He loves books. And he has a vivid imagination. All good things so far. Seeking in Paris the objects I then sought, I felt that the society of such a man would be, to me, a treasure beyond price. And this feeling I frankly confided to him. It was at length arranged that we should live together during my stay in the city. And as my worldly circumstances were somewhat less embarrassed than his own, I had a little bit more money than he did, I was permitted to be at the expense of renting, and furnishing in a style which suited the rather fantastic gloom of our common temper. A time-eaten and grotesque mansion, long deserted through superstitions into which we did not inquire, and tottering to its fall in a retired and desolate portion of the Faubourg Saint-Germain. So, what we're getting here, our narrator has some money. It says right here, as my worldly circumstances were somewhat less embarrassed than his own. Our narrator had more money than Dupin. So because he had more money, he was the one who was going to be renting their house, giving them a place to stay. What they ended up renting, not just a simple house or an apartment like Sherlock Holmes. No, instead, they rent an old rundown mansion. Let's put our phones away, thank you very much. Or an old rundown mansion, as it says. A grotesque mansion, long deserted through superstitions, into which we did not inquire. It's like, oh yeah, this place is haunted. I'm not going to talk about that, though. How much is it? That cheap? Okay, all right. There's a reason why if you own a house and someone dies in it, Your property value goes way down. Same thing here. This place apparently was haunted, so there were superstitions around it, so they got the house for really cheap. So now we have been introduced to our main character. We have a lot of information about him, things that he has. He loves books, he works hard, he has a vivid imagination, and he is apparently someone to be around. Our narrator likes to be around him, so they move in together while he is in France, Paris. Had the routine of our life at this place been known to the world, we should have been regarded as madmen, although perhaps as madmen of a harmless nature. Our seclusion was perfect. We admitted no visitors. Indeed, the locality of our retirement had been carefully kept a secret from my own former associates, and it had been many years since Dupin had ceased to know or be known in Paris. We existed within ourselves alone. So, where they lived, right here, was perfectly by themselves, secluded. Alone. If you live by yourself with one other person, you and that person are going to get pretty close. That's just kind of what happens. Let me tell you, some weird things happen in college whenever you're with your roommates for a long period of time. Some strange things start happening, start getting weird and goofy. So, same thing here. We have these two guys who own a mansion by themselves, renting it out, or I guess they bought it outright. And they could be seen as madmen, harmless madmen, because they live completely by themselves here. It was a freak of fancy in my friend, for what else shall I call it, to be enamored of the night for her own sake. And into this bizarrerie, as into all his others, I quietly felt, giving myself up to his wild whims with a perfect abandon. The sable divinity would not herself dwell with us always, but we could counterfeit her presence. At the first dawn of the morning, we closed all the massy shutters of our old building, lighted a couple of tapers, which strongly perfumed, threw out only the ghastliest and feeblest of rays. By the aid of these, we then busied our souls in dreams, reading, writing, or conversing, until warned by the clock of the advent of the true darkness. Then we sallied forth into the streets, arm in arm, continuing the topics of the day, or roaming far and wide until a late hour, seeking amid the wild lights and shadows of the populous city that infinity of mental excitement which quiet observation can afford. So, what these guys would do every single day to be considered weird, crazy people living by themselves, what they would do is all day they would sit in silence. They would have all their shutters closed, like all their windows closed and all the blinds put down so it's all dark inside. They would light candles everywhere. They would write. They would read. They would talk about life. And then at night, once they started getting really bored, once night happened, they would both walk outside and try to find some night excitements, as it says. That's what they would do every single day, right here. And running far and wide until a late hour, seeking amid the wild lights and shadows of the populous city, the infinity of mental excitement, which quiet observation can afford. If you go from mental excitement to mental excitement to mental excitement, if you're doing crazy things throughout the entire day, you get really tired. Same thing if you are always sitting in there in quiet observation. If you're just sitting there playing video games all day, you're just quiet, or just reading a book or something. Hopefully you're reading a book, because that's better than playing video games. You get bored after a long time, all right? So you need some mental excitement every once in a while. So they would balance it out. They would sit quietly all day reading and talking and writing their own stuff. And then they would go out during the night to find some mental excitement. At such times, I could not help remarking and admiring, although from his rich ideality, I have been prepared to expect it, a peculiar analytic ability in Dupin. So now we finally get the narrator realizing that Dupin has a peculiar analytic ability. Remember we discussed what analytic is, or an analyst is. Someone who can analyze. Someone who can separate the sections of a person and really understand what's happening with what they do. They can almost tell you what you're going to do before you do it. They can tell you what you've done before they even met you. He seemed, too, to take an eager delight in its exercise, if not exactly in its display. He's good at it. He likes being smart, so he uses his intelligence. And did not hesitate to confess the pleasure thus derived. He loved talking about being able to do this. He boasted to me with a low chuckling laugh that most men, in respect to himself, wore windows in their bosoms. All right, now this word's always sometimes gets a little laugh. What is a bosom on a person? What? What? Anyone? What is a bosom? No one knows? Just a funny word. A bosom is someone's chest. All right? What's inside your chest? Your heart. Come on, people. Anatomy. Y'all should be taking that right now. Okay? Biology there. What's inside your bosom is your heart. So he says right here, he boasted to me that most men, in respect to himself, wore windows in their bosoms. So we have him boasting about something. Oh, I'm better than most people at this. I can understand what people have in their hearts. I can see it, what they have in their hearts. Kind of an interesting thing there. He doesn't mean literally you can look into their heart itself. He can see what they want in life. He was wont to follow up such assertions. He would follow that up by proving it, by direct and very startling proofs of his intimate knowledge of my own heart. His manner at these moments was frigid and abstract. His eyes were vacant in expression, while his voice, usually a rich tenor, rose into a treble, which would have sounded petulantly but for the deliberateness and entire distinctness of his enunciation. Observing him in these moods, I often dwelt meditatively upon the old philosophy of the bipart soul, and amused myself with the fancy of a double Dupin, the creative and the resolvent. So this is what he would look like whenever he would, Dupin would look like this when he into heart. Dupin would look like this when he looked into someone's heart. He would get this kind of glassy-eyed look. Even his voice would change. His voice would go from a tenor, which is vaguely representative with what my voice is like. It's a tenor. And his instead would go up to a treble. He would go up a little bit as he is thinking and as he is looking into someone's soul. That's kind of a strange thing to do, but it's a characteristic of what he's doing. He's actively looking into someone's soul, into someone's heart, about what they are really meaning. What is he really observing about these? Because he would change so much when he was doing this, our narrator thought that was reminded of an old philosophy, the bipart soul. And as I said, he amused himself with this idea that maybe there are two different people inside Dupin. One person who's just a creative, normal person. The other person is this resolvent, mysterious guy. That's what he was saying down here. Let it not be supposed, from what I have just said, that I am detailing any mystery or penning any romance. What I have described in The Frenchman was merely the result of an excited or perhaps of a diseased intelligence. But of the character of his remarks at the periods in question and example will best convey the idea. So, what he's saying, now I'm not telling you a lie here. That's what he's saying. I'm not penning any romance. I'm not telling a lie. Not telling a lie. What I have described in The Frenchman is merely his intelligence, or maybe his diseased intelligence, since he's kind of strange here. All I'm saying is this is the character of his remarks. The best thing I can do is give you an example of this. So he's going to provide an example. He's going to provide an example of when Dupin has done this before. I'm sorry, y'all in the back. I know it's kind of hard to see for some of y'all. So he's going to provide us with an example of when Dupin has done this before. I've showcased his incredible talent. I've showcased his kind of strange change in nature, where he's go from his normal voice to a slightly higher voice as he is looking at somebody and observing them. We were strolling one night down a long, dirty street in the vicinity of the Palais Royal. Being both apparently occupied with thought, neither of us had spoken a syllable for 15 minutes at least. So both of them were just walking together, and they weren't talking. They were just thinking for themselves. All at once, Dupin broke forth with these words. So they're sitting there in silence, walking normally for like 15 minutes. Then all of a sudden, Dupin turns to him and starts saying these words. We don't know what words they are yet. But we do know that he is going to be looking into him as a person. He's going to be studying him. He is a very little fellow, that's true, and would do better for the theater des varietés. Des varieties, we'll say. For French words, remember, I'm going to suck them up. They're just going to be horrible. So all of a sudden, he starts off with this phrase. It's like he's saying something in the middle of a conversation. Oh, he's a very little guy. I'm sure he'd be really great in the theater. De varietés. What? Huh? There can be no doubt of that, I replied unwittingly. So he replied, our narrator replied unwittingly, or without thinking. That's what unwittingly means. And not at first observing, so much had I been absorbed in reflection, the extraordinary manner in which the speaker had chimed in with my meditations. In an instant afterward, I recollected myself, and my astonishment was profound. So these guys are walking down the street, not talking whatsoever. Very normal for guys to do, all right? We don't talk super often. And out of nowhere, Dupin says, oh, he's a really small guy, but I'm sure he'll be really great in theater over here. And he goes, oh, yeah, I'm pretty sure, yeah. Yeah, there can be no doubt. And keeps going. It's like they had a conversation without having a conversation. How did that happen? How did Dupin know what he was thinking, even? Dupin, said I gravely, this is beyond my comprehension. I did not hesitate to say that I am amazed, and can scarcely credit my senses. How was it possible you should know I was thinking of... Here I pause, to ascertain beyond a doubt whether he really knew of whom I thought. So he's testing him here. It's a test. He stopped right here. So he stopped to test them. That is annoying. He stopped here to say, you know what? If he really knew what I was thinking, then I'm going to stop here and see if he knows who I'm talking about. It's like someone, making you guess, hey, what am I thinking about? You can say like tacos or nachos or whatever. You might be right. He's able to answer here automatically. Of Chantilly, said he. Why do you pause? You were remarking to yourself that this diminutive figure unfitted him for tragedy. Whoa. So, not only was Dupin able to tell who he was talking about, but also what he was thinking about that person. Not just about the person in general, but also of what he was thinking about him. That his size, his diminutive figure, his small size, that's what diminutive figure means, small size. And how his small size unfitted him for tragedy, for tragic stories, tragic plays. This was precisely what had formed the subject of my reflections. Chantilly was a quondam cobbler of the Rue Saint-Denis, who, becoming stage mad, had attempted the role of Xerxes in Servilian's tragedy, so-called, and been notoriously pasquamated for his pains. Again, a bunch of French words here. So he had been notoriously pacified for his pains. So this character, this guy, Chantilly, all right, went stage mad. That means he was like, I can do this, when really he can't. It's like me, Mr. Reynolds, saying, I can be a basketball player. Can Mr. Reynolds be a basketball player?
No.
Why not? What do you mean? You're just assuming that. I could be a baller, okay? You don't know that. I can shoot hoops all day. 3-point. No, I'm just joking. I can't at all right? It's really sad. Don't ever invite me to play basketball. It's depressing. Same thing here. Chantilly is this really short guy, and he wants to be a guy named Xerxes. Xerxes is a famous king. Do usually, whenever you see kings in movies and stuff, are they really short guys? No, they're usually super powerful guys. They're big, tall men. So, to have this super short guy play a Xerxes character, a king, is kind of funny. So he was notoriously pacified for his pains. He's notoriously made fun of. That's what he's saying here. He is made fun of for being short. And Xerxes, that we're talking about, remember, is a king figure. King in place. So this character, Xerxes, is supposed to be played by these large men. But this Chantilly actor said, no, I can play him. I can play him. And he's like super short, and he's made fun of for being short after that. Tell me, for heaven's sake, I exclaimed, the method, if method there is, by which you have enabled to fathom my soul in this matter. So tell me, how did you figure that out? How did you know that I was thinking about this? In fact, I was even more startled than I would have been willing to express. So he was hiding how very surprised he was by how he knew what he was thinking about. It was the fruitier. Just looking at the word fruitier, what do you think that he does? Something with fruit. Yes, okay. The seller of fruit, essentially. Who brought you to the conclusion that the mender of souls was not of sufficient height for Xerxes at his genius omni. As in, like, continuing on. The fruitier? You astonish me. I know no fruitier whomsoever. The man who ran up against you as we entered the street. That may have been 15 minutes ago. So, we know the fruitier is someone who sells fruit. And we know also that apparently this fruitier, while they were walking down the street earlier, bumped into them. That's it. And that's how he knew that what he was thinking about. Kind of strange there. That's some intelligence. That's some analyzing going on. So this man who ran up against you as we entered the street is the fruitier. I now remembered that, in fact, a fruitier carrying upon his head a large basket of apples had nearly thrown me down by accident as we passed from the Rue C into the thoroughfare where we stood. But what this had to do with Chantilly, I could not possibly understand. Same here, we don't understand that at all. There was not a particle of charlatanery about Dupin, as in he's a charlatan, he is a fake here. I know that the language here is a lot more difficult than what we're used to. Y'all, let's keep our heads up, please. Let's keep our heads up, please. Thank you very much. I know the language here is much more difficult than what we're used to, because we have already done a lot of work with Sherlock Holmes. We need to take a step back and help you understand Edgar Allan Poe. His writing is much more technical and much more difficult. But for your Project 50, if you need that, you need to understand Edgar Allan Poe. So I'm trying to help you out here. There's not a particle of fakeness about Dupin. I will explain, he said. And that you may comprehend all clearly, we will explain, he said. And that you may comprehend all clearly, we will first retrace the course of your meditations, from the moment in which I spoke to you until that of the rencontre of the fruitier in question. The larger links of the chain run thus: Chantilly, Orion, Dr. Nicholas, Epicurus, Sterotomy, the Street Stones, the Fruitier. Whoa, stop there. Can you control where your thoughts go? A lot of times it's very difficult, all right? It's very difficult. Sometimes I have to ask my wife, please stop, please stop. Tell me, how did we get to this conversation? Because I have no idea where we went, how we started and where we went. No idea. And so she has to explain to me, we talked about this, then that, oh, and that reminded me of this, and I get lost. But that's what we did here. He went back in time. His thing, now, we last talked about was Chantilly. Before that, you were thinking about Orion. Before that, you were talking about Dr. Nicholas. Before that, Epicurus. Before that, Sterotomy. Before that, the Street Stones. And before that, the Fruitier. I just numbered them, going back. So, he knows exactly what he was thinking about as they were walking down the street. Each individual part. That's impressive right there. That takes Sherlock Holmes and just ups it up to 11,000 here. There are few persons who have not at some period of their lives amused themselves in retracing the steps by which particular conclusions of their own minds have been attained. What I just said about my wife has to explain sometimes how our conversation went. Where did we start? How did we finish? What was in the middle? A lot of people do that. They talk about where the conversations went or where their brains were thinking about. The occupation is often full of interest, and he who attempts it for the first time is astonished by the apparently illimitable distance and incoherence between the starting point and the goal. Your brains sometimes are incredibly stupid with how it goes from one topic to the next. Mine is the same way. Sometimes I'll be thinking about Pokemon, then all of a sudden I'll start thinking about particle physics. How we got there, sometimes my brain does not understand. But we get there every once in a while. Same thing here. Sometimes that distance between your starting point and your end point is an illimitable distance and incoherence between the starting point and the goal. You have no idea where you got there, how you got there. What then must have been my amazement when I heard the Frenchman speak what he had just spoken. And when I could not help acknowledging that he had spoken the truth, he continued. So I said, wow, you're right. So he continues on. He keeps talking. We had been talking of horses, if I remember aright, just before leaving the Rue C. That was the last subject we discussed. So he's going to explain now. The process, we'll call it. Narrator's thoughts. I have a hard enough time understanding other people, let alone understanding, I know exactly what you were thinking about as you walked in. That's pretty impressive here. And he's explaining to us how he knows this. As we crossed into the street, a fruitier with a large basket upon his head, brushing quickly past us, thrust you upon a pile of paving stones, collected at a spot where the causeway is undergoing repair. Okay, so this guy with a basket bumped into you and he knocked you down onto the road where they're repairing it right now. You stepped upon one of the loose fragments, slipped slightly, strained your ankle, appeared vexed or sulky, muttered a few words, turned to look at the pile, and then proceeded in silence. Pretty normal here. If you trip, you might go, oh, stupid rock, and keep going. Everyone's done that before. I was not particularly attentive to what you did, but observation has become with me, of late, a species of necessity. So I've been observing you as we walked. So he's going to keep going here. He's going to continue on explaining what he has done, how he has watched him and observed what he was thinking. You kept your eyes upon the ground, glancing with a petulant expression at the holes and ruts in the pavement, so that I saw you were still thinking of the stones, until we reached the little alley called Le Mortagne, which had been paved by the way of experiment. With the overlapping and riveted blocks. Here your countenance brightened up, and perceiving your lips move I could not doubt that you murmured the word serotomy, a term very effectively applied to this species of pavement. I knew that you could not say to yourself serotomy without being brought to think of atomies, and thus of the theories of Epicurus. And since when we discussed this subject not very long ago, I mentioned to you how singularity, yet with how little notice, the vague guesses of that noble Greek had met with confirmation in the late nebular cosmology. Wow. So, a lot of things there that we need to unpack, that we need to go through. What he's doing is talking about the steps of his thoughts. He says, I saw you do this, looking at the stones and being a little bit angry. And I noticed whenever we moved to this alleyway that's been recently paved, you brightened up. And you quietly said the words to yourself, serotomy. So, from there, I just followed with what you were thinking. I knew that earlier we were thinking about this, so I know that it would come to your mind again. I knew that what we talked about went to this, so I know your mind would continue with that. This is some crazy way of thinking here. I felt that you could not avoid casting your eyes upward to the great nebula in Orion, the Orion's belt, up in the nebula. Remember, this is a time where the stars could be easily seen before electric lights. And I certainly expected that you would do so. You did look up, and I was now assured that I had correctly followed your steps. But in that bitter tirade upon Chantilly, which appeared in yesterday's Muse, the satirist, making some disgraceful allusions to the cobbler's change of name upon assuming the buckskin, quoted a Latin line, about which we have often conversed. I mean the line, pendit inquitium litera prima sonum, which translates to the fire blast destroyed the old version. So he is following this guy's thoughts. He knows exactly what he is thinking of because he is explaining. We know that because he's explaining it, at least. He is following his line of thoughts as he is going. And he knew it. He guessed it. I had told you that this was in reference to Orion, so that we have our connection. You thought about Chantilly because we were talking about Orion and this Latin phrase here. And so that connected. I had told you that this was in reference to Orion, formerly written Urian, and from certain pungencies connected with this explanation. I was aware that you could not have forgotten it. It was clear, therefore, that you would not fail to combine these ideas of Orion and Chantilly. That you did combine them, I say by the character of this smile, which passed over your lips. You thought of that poor cobbler's immolation. So far you had been stooping in your gait, but now I saw you draw yourself up to your full height. I was then sure that you reflected upon the diminutive figure of Chantilly. At this point, I interrupted your meditations to remark that as, in fact, he was a very little fellow, that Chantilly. He would do better at the Theatre des Varietés. So he explains all of his thought process of not just himself, but of what the narrator was thinking. He goes through and knows exactly what he was thinking, when he was thinking of it, and why he was thinking of it. Till to the point where he decided to join in with his inner dialogue, his inner conversation, and he butts in about Chantilly, this short actor. He does make a point to point out that he is, in fact, short. That's how he does it there. That's how he knows exactly what he's thinking. This guy is an analyst of analysts. He is using his brain on a wavelength that we would be shocked by. Not long after this, we were looking over an evening edition of the Gazette des Tribunaux. Tribunaux. So it's a newspaper, all right? A Gazette is a newspaper. When the following paragraphs arrested our attention. So we have been introduced to what an analyst does, how they think outside the box, how they observe people in all their actions and all their apparently thoughts. We've been given an example of one of these people, an analyst, with our detectives, Auguste Dupin. And now we are going to be introduced to an actual mystery. And we have this Gazette, this newspaper that's going to introduce it to us. Extraordinary murders. This morning, about 3 o'clock, the inhabitants of the Quartier de Saint-Roch were aroused from sleep by a succession of terrific shrieks. Yeah. issuing apparently from the fourth story of a house in the Rue Morgue, known to be in the sole occupancy of one Madame l'Espagne and her daughter, Mademoiselle Camille. After some delay, occasioned by a fruitless attempt to procure admission in the usual manner, so while people knocked on the door, no one came to the door, the gateway was broken in with a crowbar. If you can't get in the normal way, by someone knocking on the door, break in. And 8 or 10 of the neighbors entered, accompanied by 2 gendarmes. By the time the cries had ceased, but as the party rushed up the first flight of stairs, 2 or more rough voices and angry contention were distinguished, and seemed to proceed from the upper part of the house. As the second landing was reached, these sounds also had ceased, and everything remained perfectly quiet. The party spread themselves and hurried from room to room. Upon arriving at a large back chamber in the fourth story, the door of which, being found locked with the key inside, was forced open, a spectacle presented itself which struck every one present, not less with horror than with astonishment. So, the mystery so far. The people heard screams from their neighbor's house on the fourth story. All the neighbors try to break into the house to see what's going on. They break in and rush up the stairs. And on the fourth story, they find a couple of oddities. They find a locked room, a door with the key in it and locked, smashed open. And what's in there, is not really something horrible, but it's left them astonished. It's left them surprised. The apartment was in the wildest disorder. The furniture broken and thrown about in all directions. There was only one bedstead, and from this the bed had been removed and thrown into the middle of the floor. On a chair lay a razor, besmeared with blood. On the hearth were 2 or 3 long and thick tresses of gray human hair, also dabbled in blood, and seeming to have been pulled out by the roots. Ooh. Have any of y'all ever accidentally ripped hair out before? It's not fun, all right? Upon the floor were found 4 Napoleons, an earring of topaz, 3 large silver spoons, 3 smaller of metal d'Alger, and 2 bags containing nearly 4,000 francs in gold. So a bunch of money here. So they found a bunch of strewn, priceless objects and a big bag of money. The drawers of a bureau, which stood in one corner, were open and had been apparently rifled, although many articles still remained in them. A small iron safe was discovered under the bed, not under the bedstead. It was open, but the key still in the door. It had no contents beyond a few old letters and other papers of little consequence. So they found underneath the bed a safe that's been opened and mostly cleaned out. There's still a couple of things in there, but nothing of consequence, nothing important. Of Madame l'Espagne, no traces were here seen, but an unusual quantity of soot being observed in the fireplace. A search was made in the chimney, and, horrible to relate, the corpse of the daughter, head downward, was dragged therefrom, it having been thus forced up the narrow aperture for a considerable distance. So, the horrible thing that they found, besides this room was destroyed and rifled through, was in the chimney, there was a bunch of soot, or a bunch of leftover remains of a fire. And so they looked up the chimney to see what was up there, and they found the dead body of her daughter stuffed up the chimney. Have you ever wondered what happened to St. Nicholas? That could be what happened right there, stuffing up the chimney. That was comedic gold. Y'all are jerks. The body was quite warm. Upon examining it, what would it mean? What would it matter if the body is warm? What does that mean? It's fresh. That means the body is still warm enough after being dead. Upon examining it, many exhortations were perceived, or many thoughts were thought of, no doubt occasioned by the violence with which it had been thrust up and disengaged. Upon the face were many severe scratches, and upon the throat dark bruises and deep indentations of fingernails, as if the deceased had been throttled to death. So the body had a bunch of scratches all over the face, and it looked like there were like massive finger marks that had throttled the throat. After a thorough investigation of every portion of the house without farther discovery, the party made its way into a small paved yard in the rear of the building, where lay the corpse of the old lady, with her throat so entirely cut that upon an attempt to raise her, the head fell off. They find her mom outside in the backyard, with her head her neck so destroyed, when they tried to raise her up and move her, the head fell off. Some craziness here. The body, as well as the head, was fearfully mutilated, the former so much so as scarcely to retain any semblance of humanity. To this horrible mystery, there was not as yet, we believe, the slightest clue. Notice here the slight difference of the spelling of clue, which is a common thing. Some words over the past 150 years have changed in spelling. Actually, this would be 170 years. But that's where we're going to end our story for today. That's our part 1 of 3. Each day this week we're going to be studying a new part, reading it. This first part is the most difficult because they have that strange beginning. From here on out, it's a pretty simple story, all right? I know that first bit was a little bit confusing, so thank you for listening in and let me break it down for you as much as I could.